Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. If you're enjoying the show, I would so appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, or follow along wherever you are listening or maybe watching, depending on where you are. In this week's show, I have my eye on Mercury. Mercury is going to be making some quirky moves in the weeks ahead, late October, and especially as we head into November. So I am going to focus on Mercury in today's show. I will mostly be talking about Mercury in Sagittarius, and I'm going to share a little bit about some things to watch out for because there is a little bit of a tricky component to this transit. This also means I will be touching on the next Mercury Retrograde, which will start in Sagittarius on November 9th. It is time to start thinking about the year ahead, and if you'd like to draw on astrology insights and timing as you plan for 2026, I hope you'll join my Plan Your Year Ahead course, which starts on November 10th. In this live 4-part training, you'll learn the timing tool of profections, and you'll discover how to identify some important topics and themes for your year ahead. You'll also create a monthly calendar for the next 12 months based on your personal astrology chart. And I'll guide you through the most important transits and timing trends for 2026 so that you can connect what's happening in the sky with your chart and life. If you'd like to join us, pop over to kellysastrology.com where you can register today. There is an early bird rate that is available until October 27 as well. All right, team. So let's get back to Mercury and its upcoming transit in Sagittarius, which is why I have my eye on Mercury. You know, one of the things astrologers do when we're looking at the year ahead, there's a lot of things we do, but one of the things we do is we consider when planets will be moving through signs that may be especially helpful or a little bit more frustrating and potentially problematic for them. In last week's episode, we talked all about one of those really sweet or helpful or more auspicious signs for 2025, and that was to do with Venus in Libra. In today's show, I'm going to be sharing about a cycle that I've had my eye on as a potentially messy or more frustrating transit for 2025, and that is Mercury in Sagittarius. And there's a couple of reasons for this. It's not just Mercury in Sagittarius on its own. It's what will happen to and with and involving Mercury while it's in Sagittarius. So the compounding, pieces here make this one of those cycle to watch and bring a little bit of caution to. Technically, Mercury in Sagittarius is known as a planet in detriment. And this is a designation that a planet gets when it is in the sign opposite the one that it rules. Part of the understanding here is that a planet is far from home and therefore maybe in unfamiliar territory with unfamiliar customs or ways of doing things. A little bit like if you've ever traveled to a foreign country where maybe you don't know the language or the currency is different or the religious traditions are different and you feel a little bit out of place. That's kind of like a planet that is in detriment. Now, that's not the same as saying that this is an absolutely bad or terrible thing. That's not what we're trying to say here. What this term is a clue towards with Mercury and Sag is that there is a misfit kind of energy between Mercury's approach and Mercury's preferred way of doing things versus the vibe and the motivations of the sign of Sagittarius. Neither of these things are bad or problematic. It's that we do get a few weird quirks when the two come together. So let me explain a little bit more about what I mean. Mercury is a planet who loves details, loves technical notes, loves to analyze, loves a good spreadsheet, loves a good plan. Mercury loves to fact check, to organize. Mercury loves to measure and to specify. Mercury wants to connect and to communicate, wants that interconnectedness, wants to talk things through or support methods of communication in a clear, organized, timely, smooth, factual, and well-informed way. In Sagittarius, we are less focused on the details. This is the sign of Jupiter, or one of the signs of Jupiter after all. And instead, we are drawn to the grand vision. So in Sagittarius, we are wanting to give voice to the dreams inside and maybe to be a little daring or a little bold. We want to go for adventures. We want to chase new experiences. We perhaps want to be out of our comfort zone. In Sagittarius, we're really focused on experiences or opportunities that might help us experience a sense of purpose or even meaning. When a planet is in Sagittarius, it is definitely encouraged to take a leap of faith, to trust that things will just work out. That optimistic quality of Jupiter comes through in Sagittarius. So a planet in Sagittarius is like, hope for the best, act with good intentions, stay in line with your integrity, and just focus on moving forward. In Sagittarius, particularly if we think about Mercury, there's a focus on story and meaning and the quest for purpose, if you like. And if we go a little further, in Sagittarius, Mercury might be encouraged to move a little more quickly than it might prefer. Mercury might be encouraged to kind of just go for it rather than to keep planning and organizing. That idea of leap before being fully ready, that can be a little bit of a Mercury in Sagittarius theme. So sometimes that means we're a little premature. We might be a little bit impatient. We might be blurting things out before we've fully formed our ideas or reasoning. Mercury in Sagittarius, we do have some great storytellers, beautiful writers who have told timeless tales and stories that have Mercury in Sagittarius. And so Mercury in Sagittarius does have this storytelling quality. And the goal of a story is to maybe impart some meaning or describe a moral process, for instance, to inspire you, or maybe even to confront and challenge you. And Mercury in Sagittarius is focused on that kind of meaning and that broad theme of the story. And so Mercury in Sagittarius is kind of one of those placements that we know as a placement that won't let a few facts get in the way of a good story. Now, the other side of Mercury in Sagittarius, and this is where we see that technical quality of a planet in detriment kind of in action. Mercury in Sagittarius is going to question or challenge established practice. Maybe it's going to seem a little bit rebellious. Mercury in Sagittarius might be pointing out inconsistencies or highlighting a lack of fairness. Mercury in Sagittarius can get really inflamed or really worked up about injustices and maybe wants to call attention to them. So there is a little bit of an undertone of how are we all staying within our integrity here? Or do we need to check ourselves and maybe adjust so that our actions genuinely express our intentions or our sense of integrity? From a technical perspective, when we have a planet in detriment, we do get an unstable quality being brought forward. There is more of perhaps things being in flux or things being uncertain, which is very common for a planet in detriment, and particularly for a planet that might be in a mutable sign and in detriment. So that's a clue that this period of Mercury in Sagittarius, which I am going to give you the details and dates about in a second, is going to be a time where things are more in flux. You might be questioning things. Answers might not be known. It may be too soon to lock things down. Now, when we have a planet in detriment, especially a planet like Mercury that is so connected to so many things of our day-to-day lives, this timeline might help reveal things that are no longer working. It might show us where there are flaws in a system or a process, and that revelation, if you like, or that maybe breakdown of a system that can't, handle the current situation, that's a clue that we need to update and improve things so they can better meet the needs of our current environment. And so all of this to say, Mercury in Sagittarius is definitely going to be a little bit more of a bumpy time where things to do with schedules or plans or agreements or logistics are less reliable and less certain than they have been up until this point. So it's got kind of a wobbly energy, and something that's already a bit wobbly in your chart and life might kind of have more of that breaking apart piece once Mercury comes into Sagittarius. And so things that are kind of not going so well, but you're kind of just keeping it together, maybe it's like a duct tape situation, those things, those temporary fixes may not hold while Mercury is in Sagittarius. And along the way, this might clue us in to an important idea. We might clarify something that needs a refresh. We might have an important realization that helps us not just kind of pull apart what's kind of been broken and put back together, but to go back to the drawing board and reaffirm what our intentions are, and then to build something that's maybe a little different, but better representative of what our true intentions might be. So that is classic Mercury and Sag. We've gone straight into big picture things. And so speaking of details, maybe struggling with those when Mercury's in Sag, let's talk a little bit about some of the dates and details that you need to know for this Mercury in Sagittarius transit. Now, I'm thinking about this transit as a transit taking place in two parts, and I want to tell you a little bit about why. So Mercury goes into Sagittarius for the first time on October 29. So Mercury will be in Sagittarius for part 1 from October 29 to November 18. Now, part 2 of Mercury in Sagittarius starts on December 11 and it runs until January 1st. And I want to tell you a little bit about each of these two parts of Mercury in Sagittarius and what's different or unique about each part, I should say. What I also want to say is, why do we have two parts of Mercury in Sagittarius? I'm having a lot of Mercury retrograde moments as I'm recording this show, which typically happens. So we have two parts of Mercury in Sagittarius. Part 1, October 29 to November 18. Part 2, December 11 to January 1. Now, what Mercury is doing is it goes into Sagittarius in late October, and then in early November, more dates and details to come, but let's just describe the big picture first. In early November, Mercury will go retrograde around 6 degrees of Sag. And so as part of that Mercury retrograde, Mercury will actually reverse out of Sagittarius and go back into Scorpio for a period of time. The Mercury retrograde will end while Mercury is in Scorpio, and then Mercury will be moving forward again. And it's not until December 11 that Mercury comes back into Sagittarius, this time now moving forward with the retrograde behind it. And so for partly that Mercury retrograde reason happening in Sagittarius in the first part of Mercury in Sagittarius this year, I think the first part of Mercury in Sag is potentially the more trickiest or problematic. And that's really what I wanted to get across to you in today's show, that on the 29th of October, Mercury goes into Sagittarius and we have a very tricky, almost 3 weeks of Mercury in Sagittarius, moving very slowly, going retrograde. And the other piece is that Mercury retrograde will conjunct Mars in Sagittarius in that first part. So let me break those details down for you. So part 1, Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, October 29 to November 18. I do think this is potentially the trickiest of the two Mercury and Sag transits, and that is because of those reasons I was just mentioning. Mercury is moving slowly. Even as it goes into Sagittarius, Mercury is still already moving slower than normal because it is preparing to go retrograde. Now, on November 4th, Mars will move into Sagittarius, and Mercury is, of course, already there. And that adds a little bit of heat and kind of inflammatory energy or irritating energy that Mercury is then going to have to deal with. So Mercury goes into Sag on October 29, and then after November 4th, Mars comes into Sagittarius and just makes it a little more uncomfortable for Mercury there. So extra heat, kind of further, activating or sort of inflaming and arousing the passions, which Mercury and Mars together in a fire sign are very good for. Mercury will go retrograde on November 9th, and that is at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, there's two parts to the Mercury retrograde. The whole Mercury retrograde is from November 9 to November 29, and the first part of that is in Sagittarius, and the second part of that is in Scorpio. I'm not talking a lot about the Mercury retrograde in Scorpio because, to my personal opinion, the trickier part of Mercury retrograde is the part with Mercury in Sag. So Mercury's retrograde for almost 3 weeks, most of November, the 9th to the 29th. And the first part, when Mercury's retrograde in Sagittarius, that starts on November 9 and it continues until November 18, when Mercury in its reverse cycle leaves Sagittarius and pops back in to Scorpio. Okay. The one final piece that I just need to make sure you have the dates and details is that a few days after Mercury goes retrograde, it will make a conjunction to Mars. So this is November 12th. Mercury and Mars will meet at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. And technically speaking, that is a very troublesome aspect for Mercury. It is in the sign of its detriment, it's moving backwards, and now it is bumped in to that kind of sharp edge of Mars. So we're going to find that November 12th is a particularly tricky day with maybe broken agreements or details and information that is lost or documents that are missing or damaged in some way. Mentally, we're all going to need to take care of our mindset because this feels like being very frazzled, like having too many things going on at once. And the reason I tell you all this now is that as best you can, clear things out of your schedule and plan around that November 12th period, at least a couple of days before and after. Things that are non-essential that you can either try and get done before or you can delay until after, we're going to move them away from that November 12th period. We might also be moving them away from the Mercury retrograde station on the 9th. So there is a period at the very least from November 9th through to November 12th, where Mercury is in really a tricky state. And so life can feel a bit messy or chaotic or particularly disorganized. You haven't lost the plot, you haven't become incapable, just that some of the cosmic energies that usually help keep things more organized or happening and flowing in a more straightforward manner are totally off the boil. And so we're all going to need to give ourselves a little bit of grace at that point in time. So all of that is happening in the first part of Mercury in Sagittarius in 2025. So we've got those dates. November 9th is the station date. November 12th is the Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars day. And those two dates, we definitely want to have some caution and create some space around as best we can. So then we get a little bit of a break. Mercury is then in Scorpio from November 18 until December 11. And that's like its own separate vibe. We may or may not do another show on that, but just it's a different quality of energy to everything we've been talking about here. So let's go to part 2 of Mercury in Sagittarius. So this starts on December 11 and runs till January 1st. So it's basically going to cover that last 3 weeks of December. So now we have Mercury returning to Sagittarius, moving forward again. Mercury starting to pick up pace, which Mercury typically prefers. So we don't have that slowing down vibe that we have in early November. So in early November, Mercury's in Sag, but slowing down. Things are starting to hit the wall or hit the brakes or, delays are coming through. That's early November. When we get to this December 11, Mercury coming back into Sagittarius, we're actually going to have a chance to do some cleanup or some clarification from things that were really tricky or quite messy through that early part of November. This second part of Mercury in Sagittarius, it doesn't have Mercury retrograde and we don't have Mars in Sagittarius anymore either. So that removes 2 factors that were compounding the frustrations of Mercury. And so this period from December 11 to January 1st is like, oh, I'm not as irritated about that anymore. We can make a decision or move forward. Or whatever I was angry about, I've processed it, I've calmed down, we can be a little more perhaps, forward looking without all the angst and the baggage there. What this last period or second period of Mercury and Sagittarius in 2025 does include is a square from Mercury in Sagittarius to Saturn in Pisces. And that is happening around December 30th. It's at the tail end of Mercury in Sagittarius. So Mercury's at 26 Sag and Saturn will be at 26 Pisces. So that's December 30th. That's kind of the one extra, if you like, in addition to Mercury being in one of the signs of its detriment that Mercury's managing. Mercury Saturn is more about there's some caution, there's a sense of, we need to do things diligently, we need to be planned and prepared. Mercury Saturn aspects are very cautious. We tend to want to decline things or delay things. And if there has been some planning or organizing that's gone on that has not been well thought through, or the research was rushed, we might deal with a little bit of a snafu or a problem around that Mercury square Saturn time. You're going to be called to reaffirm your commitment to things that you have said in the past that were important. And it's a Mercury square Saturn's a little bit of we have this saying in Australia of putting your money where your mouth is. And that kind of means following through. Like you said, it was important. So how are you going to let that be communicated through your actions, whether that's showing up, whether that's, taking a stand about something. So it's really kind of putting the weight behind your words and ideas with Mercury Saturn. So there's a little pressure to commitments and agreements under that Mercury Saturn on December 30th. And it's a clue that if we want to make a plan or agreement, then we're really coming from that place of, I want to lock this in and it's going to have a lasting quality. So that's the tone of part 2, December 11 to January 1st. And it doesn't have some of the frantic, fast-paced or impatient energy that part 1 does. And I think that's where some of us are going to kind of trip ourselves up or maybe run into troubles in part 1 of Mercury in Sagittarius, which, just to recap, was from October 29 to November 18. If we're trying to do things too quickly or we're trying to push things faster than they can reasonably go, that's where we're going to run into issues. So in general, for that first part of Mercury in Sagittarius, it really is a good strategy to not rush, to intentionally slow things down. Let's create more space. Let's create more breaks and breathers between things. No, I will not be able to do 3 holiday events on one weekend, socially or with family or work related. I can do 1, for instance. We just want to reduce those scheduling pressures to try and tone down some of that stress and worry as well. So if things need more time in that first part of Mercury in Sagittarius, take it. Be that sort of mature person who says, you know what, we don't have to do this right now. Why don't we hold it off for a couple of weeks? Why don't we revisit it? Why don't we each do a little more research and then come back? Review and reconsideration is likely what is going to be a helpful strategy in that first part of Mercury in Sagittarius. And of course, because Mercury is going to be retrograde for part of this first time that it's in Sag, you might encounter delays. There may be some of those classic bloopers or crossed wires. You're ranting about somebody via email or text, and you accidentally send the message to the person you're ranting about rather than your bestie who you were trying to vent with. That would be classic Mercury retrograde in Sag with Mars types of things. Now, hopefully we're all able to kind of manage our speech and our impulsive, reactive tendencies. With Mercury retrograde having that Mars involvement, working through our anger stuff in a way that is very mature rather than reactive and destructive is going to be a really important thing to focus on. So if you're dealing with a lot of frustrations with Mercury, just think about, what is the underlying irritation or frustration? What am I actually angry about? And do I just need to step away while I address that and then come back and sort this situation? Now, I know this little part kind of is easier to say and hear than it is to do, but if we do encounter some delays or that idea of plans falling apart or things, coming to an end or this is not going to work, that sort of realization in that late October, early November period, it actually may turn out to be for the best in the long run, but it might mean that the short term is a bit chaotic and disorganized. And that's what I mean. Let's not push things Let's not try to put that square peg in a round hole now. Let's use those things that aren't straightforward, that have more issues than they do movement. Let's use that as clues. Let's go back to the drawing board and reassess here. Those classic Mercury retrograde qualities of review, revise, rethink, reconsider, they're going to be your best friend through the first part of November. Now, while Mercury is in Sagittarius, it is, of course, going to be drawing your attention towards these big ideas, these kind of fantastical, adventurous possibilities. And it's also going to have you really contemplating bold and grand plans. And I want us all to do that, to be in that kind of visualizing the better choices or the more meaningful options. You might find that you're kind of really tuning in to being more truthful or more honest or more direct. This is Mercury in a fire sign. After all, we're more upfront about what we think, what our ideas are, what our preferences are. You might be blurting things out in a bit of a haphazard way. And of course, that can be awkward in the moment. But again, often it brings things to a better place of clarity for everyone. Now, the key with Mercury and Sag and exploring all these big, bold, grand ideas is that we want to take some time to ruminate on them. We don't want to be, signing up immediately or rushing forward right away. We want to take some time to think about, is this the right thing? Is this the right time? And that way we will avoid, bloopers down the track. Now, some other things that we want to keep in mind for Mercury, so particularly for that part 1 of Mercury in Sagittarius. When I say this could be tricky for lots of Mercury things, what does that include? So let me give you a short list. Mercury in Sagittarius, especially those first kind of 2.5 weeks of November, this can be really tricky for logistics, transport. So travel, logistic, planes, trains, automobiles, issues with transit and transport, issues with shipping and logistics and the movement of goods around, different geographical areas. So issues with travel for sure. Mercury is also about the news and media and the dissemination of information. So are there issues going on with, media and media organizations? That could be something that we're seeing a lot of attention called to while Mercury is in Sagittarius. The whole piece about information and, whether it's artificial information or factual, real information, like artificial intelligence, real intelligence, it's all of this. Like, where are things just a little chaotic and out of control? And that's, I think, there's a revelatory process to this first part of Mercury in Sagittarius. So issues with details and data, issues with, actual information and facts coming forward. So we want to be very alert to statements or information that aren't actually true or are not accurate, where there's been a lot of spin to tell a good story, but might be overlooking some core facts. So that's something we want to keep in mind. And of course, Mercury is also a planet that is linked to technology. And that's why, I'm like, if you need to update technology or buy new devices, let's do it before October 29 or after November 18. We want to try to avoid Mercury and Sag if we can for major technological things. So there could be snafus with devices, with the internet access issues, with platforms online, having issues with all those things really possible with Mercury retro in Sagittarius, especially around November 12th and November 9th with Mercury stationing or with Mars. And so now that you've kind of got the heads up about this, it's a good time to do things like backing up your devices before Mercury jumps into Sag. And as I shared, if you do want to update software or buy new technology, ideally we do this when Mercury is not in Sagittarius. It also means we can work with the mindset that the days around the Mercury station retrograde, which is around November 9, and the days around Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars, which is November 12th, 3 or 4 days either side of those dates are going to be more full of bloopers and crossed wires and, frustrating correspondences. So if we know that, hopefully that will help you with a more patient attitude, and it will help you be a little more flexible where you can as things are shifting in surprising or unpredictable ways. If you do have important documents or papers to sign and submit, again, try to do this when Mercury isn't in Sagittarius. So before it goes in, or in that period in between the two parts of Mercury and Sag. And that can just help things be a little more straightforward. So that is a bunch of ideas and thoughts about why we need to keep an eye on Mercury in Sagittarius this year, and some of the classic trickster energy that we can expect, as well as the dates to keep in mind and the topics or areas of life that are perhaps most affected. All of us personally can think about the Sagittarius house in our chart. You know, if Sagittarius is your 11th house of friends, then a lot of this blooper crosswire energy is likely to show up around friendships and group plans. If Sagittarius is your second house of money, cash flow, and income, then there's probably going to be a few bloopers with bills or income or money and payments, particularly in that first part of November. And so if we know that, we can plan and prepare accordingly. Thank you all so much for listening. I so appreciate you being here and following me along on this podcast journey. I would love to hear how you are experiencing Mercury in Sagittarius in 2025. Let me know in the comments below, or even if you just want to share what house in your chart is Sagittarius, so we can have that understanding of the different areas of life that we'll all be dealing with. If you would like to join me for the Plan Your Year Ahead course, pop over to kellysastrology.com to sign up. I'll be back to share more again real soon. Until then, take care.